right, everybody, it's one, so we'll go ahead and get started. I have a little bit of a head cold. I think I should be able to make my last few slides here. It is not COVID. I can still smell and taste. My lovely husband is bringing me some cough drops. So
I had it, and I don't have COVID.
Yeah, and he doesn't have COVID, so we're good. That's my husband. Just bear with me that I sound a little bit like something's holding onto my nose. But we only have a few slides to go through, and then we have a video we're going to watch about synesthesia, and then I'm going to plan to get y'all out of here early today, just so you have time to work on Connect assignments, things like that. I know several of you have emailed me about Connect assignments. I see your emails. I will try to get back to you. But when this thing hit me yesterday, it hit me like a freight truck, and I just couldn't get up off the couch. So I'm feeling a little bit better. So hopefully tonight or tomorrow morning, I'll be able to get back to folks on emails. But essentially assume that if you had already emailed me about Connect, that whatever we said in our previous email stands. Good to see everybody signing on. Welcome, welcome. All right. So when we ended off, we were just about to start talking about the other senses. And if you're not familiar, you might be like, the other senses? I thought there were only 5. Well, there are actually a whole bunch of other senses that our bodies use. So we're going to talk about those briefly, then we'll talk about perception, and then we're going to watch a video about synesthesia, which I know someone asked about during the bio chapter. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. I find it fascinating. So, all right, so I'm going to screen share. Again, sorry for the giant eye for anyone that freaks out, but hey, we're getting close to Halloween. That's appropriate, right? All righty. So like I said, we just have a few slides left. And that's just my life right now. Everything's just falling to pieces. It's fine. Everything's fine. All right. So, these other weird senses, what are they? So, the kinesthetic sense is, it's really a series of senses. And they provide information about movement, posture, and orientation. They're located in muscle fibers and joints throughout the body. And when a person stretches or moves, the fibers essentially signal where the muscle is. And so that's what's called proprioceptive feedback. This is how we know where we are in space. This is also how we know if we're doing too much, right? So if you're not very flexible and you're trying to do the splits, right? Your body will be like, hold up there, right? This sense kicks in then. Then the vestibular sense, or the vestibular senses, provide information about balance and movement. They tell a person whether a head is tilted or moving in space, slowing down, speeding up. We get feedback here as well, and it works in tandem with the kinesthetic sense to get information about the position of the limbs and the body parts, and again, particularly the head. And if you remember, on Monday, when I pointed out the semicircular canals in the ears, those contain the sensory receptors that detect head motion. So it tells us where our head is in space. And again, if it's moving. So again, this is why if you get an ear infection or there's pressure on those, you might get dizzy. The brain pathway for the vestibular senses starts in the auditory nerve, and most of the axons of the vestibular nerve connect with the medulla, although some go through the cerebellum. So they're that midbrain that we talked about in our biopsych chapter. All right, so we've been talking all about sensation. Now we're going to do brief on perception. You want to come say hi? Okay. Simba says hi, everybody. He's just looking up at me like,
oh, how cute. What's his name?
His name is Simba, like the Lion King. That's what he came with. We adopted him when he was 2, when he's 4 now. welcome. He's gonna chill. He usually is here, but just like he takes up the comfy furniture. So he has that on like our futon or our IKEA chair over here. So perception. Perception is how our brain brings meaning to sensation. So sensation is what we bring in from the outside world. And then perception is how we interpret that information. It's not a perfect representation of it. It's going to depend on how well our brain is processing, the previous information we've taken in that helps us process that or not. Couple things here. A percept is just a meaningful product of perception. Feature detectors are cells in our cortex that specialize in the detection of specific stimulus features. So essentially, feature detectors are cells, neurons that specialize in the detection of features of stimuli. So there might be some in vision, for example, that specialize in looking at color or motion or something like that. And then the binding problem is an unsolved mystery concerning the processes used by the brain to combine many aspects of sensation to a single precept. So like, we know the brain can do this, we're just not still. And
Sorry, what was that?
the brain that are like that. So we know the brain can like take all this information and combine it, but we don't know exactly how it does that. Yes, Carter, sorry, I missed your question a minute or so ago. Yes, the kinesthetic senses are affected in any kind of topographical disorientation. It can also be sense of touch too, because that helps you navigate your world. Good question. All right, so there's a couple ways we can process these things. And these are two complementary processes, so it's not like we just use one or the other. So bottom-up processing is an analysis that emphasizes characteristics of the stimulus. And then top-down processing emphasizes our expectations, memories, and other cognitive factors. So bottom-up processing starts with what we're actually sensing. Top-down processing starts with what we expect to be sensing. And again, those two things can work in concert, or they can sort of be in conflict. Now, just like some of the sensation stuff we talked about, there are different aspects of perception that influence how we see things, hear things, feel things, etc. So perceptual constancy is our ability to recognize the same object under different conditions. So like changes in light, different illumination, changes in distance from us, changes in location, right? So like you can see this is me, and that doesn't change if I turn on this light that I have beside me, right? And that doesn't change if I get way too close to the camera, right? Or if I back up, you can still see it's me. And so there are things like color constancy, right? So like my navy blue shirt can look different colors in different lights, right? But our brains are able to interpret that it stays blue. Shape constancy, recognizing that like this pen is still this sort of long cylindrical shape, even if I face it this way, right? And you can really only kind of see the point. Size constancy as well, right? Again, similarly, if the pen gets this close, it's not all of a sudden more giant than when I have it back here, right? We're able to perceive that. All right, so it looks like some of you can't hear me, so I apologize. That's probably a Wi-Fi on campus issues. So again, remember I record these and then I'll stick them on YouTube, which will close caption them. Carter, good question. Object permanence is a little different. We'll talk about this when we get to development. Object permanence is realizing something's still there, even if it's hidden. So like, good old Simba, I don't know if you guys can see him, he's on the ottoman back here. He doesn't always have object permanence. If something ends up on top of his toy, they'll be like, where'd it go, right? But we know, like, you know, I held this pen and then I do this, you know, the pen is still there, right? That's object permanence. That's a really good question. And then Lara, the two processes are bottom up and top down. Sorry, I had a brain fart. So someone's saying in the chat that then when they look at things without a change in light, sometimes things go slightly reddish. That might be like an eye color processing thing. It's certainly something to ask your eye doctor about the next time you're there. I don't know much about that. So yes, I'm gonna get into illusions right now. Great question, Lara. So illusions are demonstrably incorrect experience of a stimulus pattern shared by others in the same perceptual environment. So we're going to talk about that. The other ways our perception can be off is just sort of bias, essentially, of the way we've learned things. I'll give you an example. I knew a guy in college who was colorblind, and he said growing up, he got really confused when people said the grass was green, because to him it was blue, right? And so it took him a while to learn that, like, no, not everybody sees it that way. You're just having a sensation and perceptual problems. Or you might send a glance at something, and because you expect something to be there, right, you just assume it's there, and then you realize later it's not, right? Our brain likes to do shortcuts and fill stuff in for us, and it's not always accurate when it does that. And then ambiguous figures are figures that are capable of more than one interpretation. So perceptual illusions here, right? I don't know if anyone else did this, but this was something I doodled a lot in the margins of my papers growing up. I don't know why, it's just always sort of fun, right? So it can look like the cube is coming towards you or going away from you, right? Depending on what you focus on. Yeah, one of these, or, you know, you can kind of play with it and you can probably see both, right? When in fact, objectively, right, it's not actually either of those things. It's a bunch of lines that intersect in a whole bunch of ways, right? This is something I showed you that first day of class, right? So it's called the Herman grid. And for most people, if you look at this, you will see grayish dots in the white that seem to appear and disappear. They're not actually there. This is just a still picture. I swear it's not a GIF or anything. Our brain just sort of tricks us. It's, you know, the way that it's perceiving this. So what are some of the theoretical ways we've tried to look at perception? So learning-based inference is the view that perception is primarily shaped by prior learning and experience. So like I've been talking about, what we've learned in the past is going to shape how we interpret things now or in the future. I mean, this can go to social things, right? So if you've been trained growing up that, you know, people of a certain ethnicity are bad or evil, right? When you see someone, that's what you're going to see. That's how you're going to interpret them. That's interesting, Elijah. You didn't see the dots until I said something about it. Yeah, sometimes it's like the power of suggestion too, right? The other learning-based inference, obviously, is it could go the other way. You've been taught that everyone's equal, so then you have a really hard time when people start making racist or xenophobic comments about around you. You're like, what? Right? Perpetual set, there we go, is the readiness to detect a particular stimulus in a given context. So, good example here, right? So we read this as be home by 5:13, right? But if we look, the figures that make up the 13 and the two B's are identical, right? But our brain, because of the context cues, knows to interpret that these are B's and this one on the end is numbers, is the 13, right? And so context cues will help us interpret things in certain ways. You know, we can think about this with like homophones being spoken verbally. You know, if someone says a word that can mean something else, the rest of their sentence gives you a clue to what they're actually talking about, right? All right, depth perception is a big thing here too. And there's a big debate over whether we learn depth perception or whether it's something we're just born with. And so I am going to hopefully show you a video. Should have checked this hyperlink before class, but we will see what happens. All right, looks like it's working, so I'm going to pause it and try a new share here so that you can hear it. All right, so this is a video about how they tested this in babies. It's called the visual cliff, and no babies were harmed in this experiment. They are safe the whole time, I promise.
Emotion is a nonverbal language.
Did you tell me to do this?
Emotions reveal the cognition, the understanding of the baby. And furthermore, emotions are the nonverbal communication of the baby towards the parent and the parent towards the baby. So therefore, I thought that emotions were a royal road, one royal road, to the study of the baby's development.
In this study, babies between 9 and 12 months are brought into the lab and placed on a large plexiglass top table. Half of the table has a checkerboard pattern just underneath the surface. But halfway across is a visual cliff, which the baby can tell drops off steeply. The plexiglass top continues, so it's perfectly fine to proceed. But the baby isn't so sure. And this is a big drop for a baby just starting to crawl. She wants to get across to get the toy. But she's cautious and looks to the opposite end of the table where her mother is. The parent is instructed to smile or make a fear face.
If the mother is posing a fear face, the baby typically does not cross this stair-step downward, this modified visual cliff or visual step. On the other hand, if the mother poses a smile or somehow poses a nonverbal communication that is not prohibitive but encouraging, the child is much more likely to cross over to her. This particular study demonstrates the role of nonverbal communication in determining the child's behavior in uncertain contexts. A baby will, when they encounter something ambiguous, something uncertain, will typically look to the significant other, the mother, the father, a grandparent, the caregiver, in order to figure out what to do. So by 11 to 12 months of age, the baby is already doing what all of us do when something unusual happens. We look around to figure out how other people are reacting.
Just getting back to our slides here. But you can see that there's where perception can come into play with, you know, what you know or what you learn from other people around you, right? So it mattered the other cues they were getting from the mom. And so in addition to those social cues, right, this is how we learn things. We learn things by watching other people. Then there are other types of cues that we use for depth perception. So binocular cues, so that depends on the use of both your eyes, or monocular cues, which are one eye. And obviously these work in concert, right? So it's not just like you only are using one eye at some point. You know, it's your brain takes all these different cues and works them together. Alrighty, so now we're going to talk about synesthesia, which I just think is very, very cool. So hopefully you all will enjoy it as well. And so synesthesia is when you sense words or numbers or other constructs like music across sensory domains. So you might taste shapes or hear colors. One possible hypothesis for this is that it might be caused by communication in the temporal, parietal, occipital lobes where they join, kind of back here. Okay, and where my hair clips are today, actually. And so the thought is that communication here, where all three lobes that do sensory things connect, might get mixed up, although some people don't think that's true at all. So I am going to show you a video about this. It's about 10 minutes long, I think maybe 8 or 10, but it'll talk about some of these other things.
Onions.
All right, same thing. I'm going to do a new share so you can see the YouTube. I'll put the captions on this one. And again, keep an open mind.
Onions were pink. Beer is blue. So peas are purple.
So about 150 years ago, people were very interested in synesthesia, and it sort of dropped out of the scientific consciousness for the last century. And the reason is the school of behaviorism took over, where people were interested in treating humans like black boxes, input-output devices. And you weren't allowed to talk about what it's like to be on the inside anymore. So people stopped being interested in consciousness and what it's like to actually perceive the world. And it's only in the last 20 years or so that the question has re-emerged. So synesthesia has had a real renaissance in the last couple of decades, where people want to understand what is the neural basis of perception, and how is it that some people perceive the world differently than other people? What is it like to see differently from the inside?
And I don't know when I necessarily first became aware of it, because it seems like it's always been there. But I know that I was definitely playing with it when I was 5 or 6 years old, because I remember raiding my parents' record cabinet, searching for records that I liked to listen to for the colors.
Synesthesia is an involuntary, unconscious, automatic linking of perceptions. A stimulus, in one sense, might trigger a perception in another sense.
It's just sort of always been just the way I think. It's just one has always been yellow, you know, certain letters have always been certain colors.
The days of the week are pretty, well, they're terribly consistent. Monday is red. And my mother said when I was 5 years old, no, Monday's blue Monday.
We don't hear with just our ears alone. We don't smell just with our noses. We don't taste just with our tongues.
Hey, wait a minute, Doc. After 20 years behind this camera, you're not going to tell me I don't see with my eyes, are you?
No, in a strict sense, you don't, Hal. Your eyes, like your other sense organs, simply receive impressions from the outside and send them on to the brain. The senses are all different. The signals are all alike.
Yeah, but then how could the brain know which sense is sending the message?
Well, you've just asked the big question. That brings us up to the brain.
This back portion of your brain is almost entirely devoted to vision, and there's a particular area of the brain that cares in particular about color. The part of your brain that would be sticking out here cares about language and words and letters, and somehow in a synesthetic brain, these areas are connecting to these areas so that words and letters will trigger a color experience.
I have grapheme color synesthesia, and so basically I associate most letters and all numbers with some sort of color. 1 alone by itself is yellow, but 4 is also yellow, but it's a more golden yellow. Some of the differences are very, very subtle, but they're definitely distinct differences in my mind.
Synesthetic perceptions can be unpleasant every once in a while, but then again, so could your sense of smell. If you're able to smell something, you probably have experienced really pleasant odors like fresh-baked cookies, your favorite home-cooked meal, your favorite perfume, and you've also experienced very unpleasant odors, such as a filthy public restroom, or vomit, or manure. Now, you've experienced extremely unpleasant odors. Do you want to permanently lose your sense of smell?
I definitely like having the color associations. It's an interesting thing to talk about, and it's kind of neat to have. And actually, once I realized that I could actually use colors to help me remember number sequences and things like that, that was actually kind of useful.
Synesthesia is not a disease. It's not a disorder. It's not something that is in any way a symptom of some other major problem. It's not something that you need to get rid of. It's an alternate way of perceiving the world.
For years, I've been trying to understand, I'm not a synesthete, I've been trying to understand what it's like to have synesthesia. And the closest sort of analogy, which I think works, is something like this. If I were to show you a photograph of Barack Obama, you would immediately think Barack Obama. Even though those words aren't written anywhere there, just seeing his face, you would immediately think those words. An important thing to understand about synesthesia is it's not the same as a hallucination. So when a synesthete sees the letter T and experiences some sort of yellow in his mind's eye, it's not the same as a hallucination. He knows that the T is in fact in black ink and that there's not yellow out there. So it's not the sort of thing that would cause a car accident, and it's not the type of thing that would count as a hallucination or something one would have to worry about.
So the most popular theory to explain synesthesia is that in different areas of the brain, you actually have cross-wiring. You have more wiring in a synesthetic brain that causes these areas to talk to each other more. I don't favor that theory. Instead, I favor a second hypothesis, which is that the amount of wiring is the same in everybody's brain. Instead, what's different is there's a slight difference in the balance of excitation and inhibition, such that activity here will cause activity here, because there's not enough inhibition of that activity. The reason I favor the hypothesis that the wiring is the same in everybody is because non-synesthetes can experience synesthesia. So for example, when people take drugs like LSD or DMT, they'll experience synesthesia. Also, many non-synesthetes, when they're very fatigued, right when they're falling asleep, somebody might slam a door and they'll see colors. So this implies that everybody is capable of a synesthetic experience. Also, for synesthetes, the amount of their experience waxes and wanes. So for example, when they are drunk with alcohol, or they're very tired, or they're very emotional or stressed out, their synesthesia tends to be much richer and more intense. And in other cases, when they're on certain drugs like antidepressants, their synesthetic experience goes down. And this has the feeling of something that is involved in inhibition in the brain rather than wiring, because there's no reason to expect that your wiring would change based on emotion and fatigue and so on.
So it doesn't matter if my Tuesday is blue, green, or yellow. The fact that it's anything may or may not mean something to someone else, but if it does, it doesn't matter if his is orange or purple.
So it turns out what we learned from synesthesia is that some people perceive reality in a different way than the rest of us. And this is probably true in many different ways that we haven't even discovered yet. Synesthesia just happens to be a very good inroad into understanding how this works and what's different about some people's brains that causes them to have a different reality.
So I think that's why I like synesthesia so much. It is such a good illustration of how perception can be different, right? And so yeah, I really like how he explains it. That's probably not that they have more crossover, just that for some reason it's like activated more than it is for the rest of us. But that we all, in theory, have the capability of doing this. So, partially because I'm sick, that's all we're going to do today. I'll hang around for a few minutes and answer any personal questions that you all have. And like I said, if you've emailed me, I'll try to get back to you this afternoon or tomorrow morning. This thing has just like hit me like a Mack truck, and I've needed lots of time to lay down, which is probably what I'm going to go do after this. So everyone have a good day. Use this time to relax or work on your Connect assignments. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you all. I appreciate it. Hopefully I'll kick it out of my system pretty soon.
Hope you feel better soon. Have a good one.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.